I'll focus on another thinker at this point, Philip Reef. Philip Reef, he's actually, as far as I can make out, I think he's agnostic. He was culturally Jewish. He grew up Jewish, but in terms of his religious beliefs, he's basically an agnostic. But he was very interested in how societies organize themselves, in how they justify their social orders. In other words, the way societies behave. How do they justify the way they behave? And he also touches on the social imaginary idea. He doesn't use the term, it's Taylor's term, but Reef talks about human societies. You could characterize them in four ways. And it's a little simplistic because I don't think any society is purely one of these. But in any given human society, probably one of them will be the dominant normative model. He talks about political man, and he says, political man is a society where people find their fulfillment through being informed and engaged in public life. And we might say, 4th century Athens would be a world of political man, where to be the fulfilled man in ancient Athens is to go to the assembly, to make a speech, to be informed, to engage in debate, to cast a vote. He then talks about religious man, and these are societies where the key thing is public religious ritual. And the example I use when I teach this in class is think about Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Here you have this ragtag bunch of people from all levels of society on their way from the Tabard Inn to the shrine of St. Thomas a Becket at Canterbury. And they tell these stories as they're on the way. But see, that makes sense in its day because you have people, they're on pilgrimage. That's an important thing. When are they, you might say, most English, if you like? Well, it's when they're on a religious pilgrimage. And we have something of that today. Catholics will still go on pilgrimages. Obviously, in Islam, in Islam, you are supposed to go to Mecca at least once in your lifetime on the Hajj. So Islam still has this religious man sensibility. Reef then says that economic man sort of supplants religious man, and that's when religion ceases to be the glue that holds society together, and economic activity does. And if you read any Charles Dickens's books are full of economic men, Mr. Gradgrind in Hard Times, Old Man Dombey in Dombey and Son, most famously Scrooge, of course. These are all characters who they are fulfilled by being involved in the economic activity of society. And Reef says that all three of these, though, the key thing about them is that what society does is it directs people outward. In the political society, the religious society, the economic society, education is about giving you the skills that allow you to be a real person within the society you have. The last phase, Reef says, is that of therapeutic man or psychological man. This is the therapeutic society. And here he says an interesting thing takes place, that no longer is culture that which directs you outwardly, shapes your social imaginary so you can fit into what is. Actually, everything switches 180 degrees. And the purpose of society and culture is to make you feel good about yourself. And therefore its purpose becomes therapeutic. If somebody holds a belief that makes you feel uncomfortable, then it's society's job to stop that person holding that belief so that you can feel good about yourself. If there are laws out there that make you feel oppressed, then those laws must change. Interesting enough, Reef says that institutions change. They move from being places, we might say, of formation. You don't go to school to have your individuality bashed out of you and made into a member of the team, as I did at my grammar school in the 70s and 80s, way back when. You go to school to be allowed to express your self-expression, child-centered learning. And Reef also says, too, there's another phenomenon that happens. Some institutions fade in importance. For example, religious institutions, the nation, and the family. Why? Because all of these things demand a sacrifice of the self. If you belong to the church, you have to stop behaving in certain ways, even if you want to. We've all heard that phrase, nobody in this family behaves that way. If you're going to be a member of a family, you've got to follow the family rules. My house, my rules. That was one of my dad's sort of mantras kind of thing growing up. Reef says these will fade away and two other institutions will become very, very powerful and prominent. He calls them hospital and theatre. we might perhaps update the language and say the medical industry and the entertainment industry. Why do they become more and more important? Because they don't demand a sacrifice of the self. They actually stop the self feeling pain or being bored. They're very psychologically therapeutic, Reef would say. And so, again, circling back to where we began, what is the hallmark of today's culture? Today's culture puts human psychological comfort and well-being at the center, rather than, we might say, the well-being of the team or the nation.
The therapeutic culture is a point I think anyone listening or watching would be able to see out there. I mean, if you look closely enough, listen closely enough, you can hear therapeutic language just entering modern parlance. There's lots of stuff about validation and affirmation. And what's also quite interesting, and you make this point on multiple levels within the book, is this inversion of values or a change of how we see things. So previously, virtuous characteristics, and I mean properly virtuous characteristics, things that are about good character and right conduct, rather than the virtue signaling we become used to, is things like being staidly stoic, patience, secrecy, concealment. They were once seen as virtues, and now they're seen as weakness, and we must therapize them and get them out and help you overcome them. What other values have we been inverting over time? Because you've written that people have come to define themselves as well by what's forbidden, and they seek to shock and to degrade at times. And so you've got this unholy dance, I suppose, between those who are saying, you do you, and then also attaching themselves to this value system, which is turned inside out from the one that we used to conform ourselves to.
Yeah, I mean, there are very well, to add to the list of previous virtues that have now, come to be seen as not so much as a weakness, but sinister. I was talking just this morning in class actually about how social media, combined with this notion of the expressive individual, that we have to express outwardly our inward feelings, has led to a world where not expressing our feelings seems sinister. And the example I used a couple of years ago when I was teaching this class, a young woman came up to me after the class and laughed and said, "I got to tell you this story." She said, "This guy asked me out on a date." And of course, she said, being the generation I am, first thing I did was I Googled him, to see what he's been up to online. And she said, "He has no social media profile," she said. And then she laughed and she said, and my intuition was, I said, "That's creepy." My intuition was, what's he hiding? So privacy disappears. The other side of it is coarseness, I think, comes to be seen as a virtue. Why? Well, if you are reserved, then you're seen as inauthentic. Secondly, if the real you is the real you, and any external limits are sources of inauthenticity, then you will tilt, your social imaginary will tilt towards transgression. And I would use, I can't speak about British politics now, but I would use American politics. In the early 70s, Richard Nixon, Watergate crisis. One of the things that most damaged Richard Nixon's reputation in the public eye were the Watergate tapes, where in the transcripts, the little phrase expletive deleted was used. And it was shocking to the American people that the American president would swear, even in a private meeting. This is not a public. I'm hard pressed today to think of a politician, right or left, in America who doesn't use profanity. Many of them will even use the F word, words that would have got you fired in my dad's day from where you worked and are now routinely used in public discourse. And I would say to the students, why is that? Well, one reason is this. Everybody knows that everybody's language is less than it should be in private. We use words in private we would never use in public. So if you're only ever polite in public, you look inauthentic and suspicious. You can establish your authenticity. You can establish your cred by dropping the F-bomb in a public speech. And both the present president of the United States and the previous incumbent, very foul-mouthed individuals, would not have made it in the 70s using that same vocabulary. And yet now that vocabulary is somehow seen as a sign of their strength, their authenticity to their followers. I would say it's a sign of how expressive individualism tilts us towards transgression. The problem, of course, is once everybody does it, it becomes the new conformity. So you have to find a new way of transgressing. And that's, I think, what has created a kind of death spiral in the culture where we just go down and down and down to more and more crudity. Because as soon as somebody establishes a norm, you've got to transgress it because it becomes a source of inauthenticity.
Yeah, I heard someone opining on the current protests that are taking place on American campuses that are led by, at least nominally, pro-Palestine protesters. And they're forming encampments, they're defacing things, they're stopping people from moving around. And this links nicely, I suppose, to your social imaginary concept, where the person opining, can't remember who it was, had said, these kids aren't doing anything now at this point very transgressive even to the social imaginary, because really they're just taking cues from what has formed over the last 60, 70 years, but they're just trying to take it as far as possible because the adults have basically said, this is what you need to do. And they're saying, well, that doesn't go far enough, so we're going to take it into our own hands. That coarseness, though, you're absolutely right. And you see it in so many different ways, besides people using it in a kind of expressively individual, like how authentic I am. There is a degradation, I would say, of the culture. If you talking about people being shocked and scandalized to see expletive deleted written in a transcript. If you just go and look on any news sites now and go flicking through, if it's a tabloid that has its own web page, what do you see? Well, you see loads of nakedness. You see swear words, you see lots of the coarse slang, and you can just find it on tap. And one thing I've noticed is a recent development, which I find pretty worrying actually, is clearly when we are subject, witness to victims of, as nations, regions, cultures, horrific attacks, or whether something's happened, whether it's, a terror attack or a serial murder or whatever. Now, because we take there's images of everything that we do, is I notice that these sites show clips of the moment up to the moment before someone's about to be killed. And people just scroll through it as though it's nothing. But that, to me, when I think about it, once I've scrolled past it mindlessly myself, I go, how have we become desensitized to that?